Imagine sitting down to watch this video. Maybe it's late at night, or you're scrolling through your phone in the middle of the day, curious about what life was really like for one of history's most powerful women. You've seen the portraits: Queen Elizabeth I, dressed in gold and pearls, her pale face glowing with pride and authority. She looks flawless, almost untouchable. But what if I told you that behind that regal perfection was a world of dirt, decay, and shocking secrets that no school history book ever mentions? From her rotting teeth to her toxic makeup, from her filthy gowns to her foul-smelling palaces, the queen who ruled the golden age of England lived in conditions that would make you cringe today. In this video, we're going to uncover the dark side of royalty, the 5 disgusting hygiene secrets of Queen Elizabeth, the first that history tried to keep hidden. So wherever you were watching from, whether it's early morning or deep into the night, get ready to step inside the Tudor world and see what life was really like behind the Queen's crown. Because once you hear these details, you'll never look at those royal portraits the same way again. In the glittering world of the Tudor court, Queen Elizabeth I stood as a symbol of power, elegance, and authority. Her image was crafted with precision: the elaborate gowns, the pearl-studded collars, the porcelain white skin, and her fiery red hair. Yet behind that majestic facade lay a reality that few textbooks ever mention. Her hygiene habits were shockingly primitive, even by the standards of her time. One of the most surprising facts about Elizabeth I was that she rarely took baths. In fact, the Queen once declared proudly that she bathed once a month, whether I need it or not. To modern ears, this sounds unthinkable, but during the 16th century, bathing was not considered an act of cleanliness. It was seen as a potential health hazard. In Elizabeth's era, people believed that bathing too often could open the pores and allow disease to seep into the body. The Tudor world was plagued by outbreaks of plague, typhus, and smallpox, and people associated water with sickness rather than sanitation. Public bathhouses had been common in medieval England, but by the time Elizabeth was queen, they had gained a bad reputation. Many were linked to immoral behavior or even prostitution, leading to their closure under Henry VIII. As a result, bathing fell out of favor entirely. The Queen, like most of her subjects, grew up in a culture that considered soap and water dangerous rather than cleansing. When Elizabeth did bathe, it was a complex and time-consuming process. There were no bathrooms or running water in the grand palaces of the Tudor court. Instead, servants would have to fetch buckets of hot water, carried up from the kitchens and poured into a large wooden tub. The Queen's bath would be scented with herbs like rosemary, lavender, and thyme, not just for their fragrance but for their supposed healing properties. Sometimes, milk or rose petals were added to the water to soften the skin. The Queen would bathe in her private chamber, surrounded by attendants who ensured her modesty and safety. But such an event was rare, more ceremonial than routine. To maintain cleanliness between baths, Elizabeth relied heavily on linen. In Tudor times, it was believed that changing one's linen frequently was a substitute for washing the body. The idea was that the clean fabric would absorb sweat, dirt, and oils from the skin. The Queen owned countless sets of fine linen undergarments, which she changed regularly, believing that this was sufficient for hygiene. Servants would wash and air these garments, but her skin itself remained largely untouched by soap and water. Perfumes and scented waters played another crucial role in Elizabeth's hygiene routine. The Tudor court was known for its overpowering smells, a mixture of human sweat, unwashed fabrics, and the ever-present stench from chamber pots. To counter this, Elizabeth surrounded herself with fragrances. Her personal chambers were filled with pomanders, small balls containing cloves, cinnamon, ambergris, and musk, which were believed to ward off foul odors and disease. Her gloves, fans, and handkerchiefs were all perfumed, creating an aura of sweetness around her, even when she had not bathed for weeks. Interestingly, this habit of rare bathing was not unique to the Queen. Most of her courtiers followed the same pattern. Water was feared more than admired, and people relied on powders, herbs, and perfumes to keep themselves fresh. Even doctors of the time advised against excessive bathing. One Tudor physician warned that hot baths could soften the skin and weaken the body, making it vulnerable to illness. In this context, Elizabeth's monthly bath seemed perfectly reasonable. However, despite her infrequent bathing, Elizabeth was still considered one of the most refined women in Europe. Her meticulous attention to appearance, the endless layers of luxurious fabric, and the sweet scents that clung to her made her seem almost divine to those around her. Yet it is fascinating to think that beneath all that splendor, the queen lived in conditions that would horrify anyone today. The same monarch who inspired loyalty, fear, and admiration across Europe carried the same unwashed body for weeks on end, hidden beneath jewels and silks. There is also a symbolic side to her bathing habits. Elizabeth understood the importance of image. She crafted her public persona carefully, the virgin queen, pure and untouchable. Bathing too often, stripping away the layers of dirt and perfume, might have been seen as too human, too vulnerable. Her aloofness, her distance from ordinary human needs, was part of what made her seem powerful. In that sense, her limited bathing reinforced her royal mystique. Yet historians cannot help but marvel at how the greatest monarch of the English Renaissance lived with such minimal hygiene. The woman who ruled over the birth of Shakespearean art, global exploration, and intellectual revolution still clung to medieval superstitions about water and health. It's a reminder that even the most enlightened eras have their blind spots, and that progress is rarely uniform. When we look back at portraits of Queen Elizabeth I, radiant in pearls and gold, her face powdered and her hair gleaming, it's easy to forget the world of grime and odor that lay just beneath the surface. Behind the dazzling imagery was a woman of her time, bound by fear, tradition, and the strange beliefs of Tudor medicine. Her rare baths may shock us today, but to her, they were a sign of wisdom and restraint. In her mind, she was protecting her health. In ours, she was neglecting it. Queen Elizabeth I remains one of the most fascinating figures in history, and her hygiene habits reveal just how dramatically our understanding of cleanliness has evolved. What was once seen as a mark of prudence now feels like a mark of discomfort. But it is precisely these human details, the dirt beneath the diamonds, that make her stories so compelling. Her reign was bathed in glory, even if she herself was not. Queen Elizabeth I's radiant smile, so often immortalized in portraits, hides one of the most shocking and unspoken truths about her reign. Her teeth were in terrible condition. By the later years of her life, her once bright smile had turned black, decayed, and rotten. In fact, her dental hygiene was so poor that foreign ambassadors often wrote about it in their reports. It's a disturbing detail that clashes with the image of the Virgin Queen, the flawless ruler who shaped an era. But Elizabeth's blackened teeth weren't just a personal problem. They became a strange symbol of status and beauty in her court, showing how fashion and wealth could sometimes trump health and hygiene. To understand how Elizabeth's teeth reached such a dreadful state, we have to look at one of her greatest indulgences: sugar. During the 16th century, sugar was a luxury that only the rich could afford. Imported from distant lands like the West Indies, it was incredibly expensive, often referred to as white gold. For Elizabeth, who adored sweet treats, sugar was both a pleasure and a statement of wealth. She ate candied fruits, marzipan sculptures, and sugar-drenched pastries daily. Her kitchens were famous for producing elaborate desserts molded into the shapes of castles, animals, and even political symbols, all made entirely out of sugar. But there was a hidden danger. In the Tudor era, people had no understanding of cavities, plaque, or bacteria. Toothbrushes were rare, toothpaste didn't exist in any modern sense, and dentistry was primitive at best. Some people rubbed their teeth with cloth or crushed herbs like mint or sage, but these methods did little to protect enamel. The Queen's constant exposure to sugar without proper cleaning led to rapid decay. Over time, her teeth began to blacken and rot. The pain must have been unbearable. Chronic toothaches, infected gums, and abscesses were common complaints even among the wealthy, and Elizabeth suffered greatly from them. As her dental health worsened, so did her speech. Records from her later years suggest that her ability to talk clearly declined because of missing or damaged teeth. It's said that she sometimes stuffed her cheeks with cloth to fill in gaps and keep her face from appearing sunken. When ambassadors came to court, they noticed her struggle to speak and her reluctance to smile. Yet even with such obvious signs of decay, her love for sweets never faded. Some historians believe her servants and physicians were too afraid to suggest she change her diet or seek treatment. After all, this was the Queen, her word was law, and her habits were beyond question. The irony of Elizabeth's condition is that her blackened teeth soon became a symbol of wealth and beauty among her courtiers. Because sugar was so rare and expensive, having dark or decayed teeth was a mark of luxury, proof that one could afford such indulgence. Aristocratic ladies began to blacken their own teeth, deliberately using soot or cosmetics, imitating the queen's appearance. It is one of history's strangest beauty trends. People willingly disfigured their smiles to look like someone whose dental health was failing. The fashion of decay, as some historians call it, spread through the upper classes of England as a bizarre compliment to their monarch. Dentistry during the Elizabethan age was crude and often dangerous. When a tooth became too painful, extraction was the only solution, but without anesthetic, it was excruciating. Barbers or blacksmiths often performed the procedure, using metal pliers or even fingers to wrench the tooth out. Infection afterward was common and could easily lead to death. The queen's physicians likely avoided pulling her teeth unless absolutely necessary, which meant she endured years of agony. Accounts mention that she would sometimes hold her cheek or touch her jaw during audiences, small signs of constant pain hidden behind her regal composure. It's worth noting that Elizabeth's dental problems also carried political weight. The queen was known for her vanity and her obsession with maintaining her youthful image. As she aged and her teeth deteriorated, she became increasingly self-conscious about her appearance. She avoided mirrors, dimmed the lighting in her chambers, and surrounded herself with flattering portraits that showed her idealized face, smooth, ageless, and untouched by decay. The reality behind those portraits was far different. The woman who ruled with unmatched confidence was privately struggling with the effects of her own indulgence. This detail about Elizabeth's teeth offers a glimpse into how differently people of her time understood health. To them, hygiene was not linked to disease prevention but to status and appearance. They didn't yet grasp that sugar could destroy the body from within or that daily cleaning could prevent rot. In a world without dental science, pain was accepted as part of life, even for queens. Elizabeth's black teeth were simply another part of the human condition, something endured rather than treated. Yet there is also a strange poetry in it. The same sugar that helped sweeten her life also brought her pain. Her glittering feasts, her golden age of abundance, and her elaborate desserts all carried a hidden price. In many ways, her decaying teeth became a reflection of her reign, glorious on the surface, but deeply human underneath. They remind us that even the most powerful monarch in the world could not escape the consequences of her choices. By the time Elizabeth died in 1603, her teeth were said to be in ruin. She had become frail, withdrawn, and fearful of being seen. But her legacy endured, as did the image she had crafted, one of strength, brilliance, and control. Few people knew about the agony behind her regal smile, and fewer still would have dared to speak of it. History remembers her as the woman who made England great, not as the woman whose teeth turned black from too much sugar. And yet this hidden truth adds a haunting humanity to her story. It shows us that behind every crown, every royal portrait, and every legend lies a person, flawed, vulnerable, and strikingly real. When we imagine Queen Elizabeth I, we picture her draped in shimmering gowns of gold and silver, adorned with pearls, jewels, and intricate lace. Her wardrobe was one of the most magnificent in European history, symbolizing power, wealth, and divine authority. Yet beneath all that splendor was a reality most people never think about. Her clothes were rarely, if ever, properly washed. The glamorous image of the Virgin Queen hides a far less elegant truth. Her garments were often filthy, heavy with sweat, dirt, and the smell of perfume masking decay. In a time when bathing was rare and washing clothes was seen as risky or unnecessary, Elizabeth's famous wardrobe was more a mask than a mark of cleanliness. Queen Elizabeth owned an astonishing number of dresses, by some accounts, over 3,000 throughout her reign. Each gown was a masterpiece, often made of silk, velvet, brocade, or satin, and decorated with gold thread, pearls, and gemstones. They were symbols of her majesty, intended to awe courtiers and foreign ambassadors. Every detail, from the stiff ruffs around her neck to the layers of embroidered skirts, was meant to project authority. But these elaborate outfits were heavy, suffocating, and almost impossible to clean. There were no modern laundry methods or dry cleaning. Fabrics like silk and velvet couldn't be washed in water without being ruined, so instead of cleaning, the queen's servants would simply air them out, sprinkle them with perfume, or replace the underlayers. Hygiene was a challenge even for royalty. Underneath those dazzling gowns, Elizabeth wore several layers of linen, a chemise, corset, petticoats, and stockings. Changing these undergarments was considered the proper way to stay clean, as linen was thought to draw out dirt and sweat from the body. The queen's maids would regularly replace the linen layers, but the outer garments, which absorbed odors and moisture, were never washed. Imagine the combination of dust, body oil, sweat, and the scent of herbs and flowers all trapped within the same gown for weeks or months. To the Elizabethan court, this was normal. To us, it sounds unbearable. Perfume was the royal solution to filth. Elizabeth adored fragrances and had entire rooms filled with scented herbs, flowers, and oils. Her dresses were stored with sachets of lavender, thyme, and rose petals, giving them a pleasant aroma even when they were not fresh. When she dressed, her attendants would sometimes spray her clothing with rosewater or rub perfumed gloves on her hands. The intention wasn't just to smell nice, but to ward off bad air. People believed foul smells caused illness, so perfume wasn't luxury, it was protection. However, no amount of rosewater could completely hide the musty scent of unwashed fabric mixed with the sweat of long court days under candlelight. Elizabeth's clothing also reflected her obsession with image. Every public appearance was a calculated act of theater. Her gowns represented the state of England itself, rich, radiant, and untouchable. She used fashion to assert power in a world dominated by men. But behind the symbolism was a physical burden. Some dresses weighed over 40 pounds, supported by stiff whalebone corsets and multiple underskirts. In summer, these layers trapped heat and moisture, making her sweat profusely. Without modern deodorants or frequent baths, her body odor would have been strong, despite the perfumes. Her attendants were tasked with maintaining her composure and appearance while never acknowledging the discomfort beneath. Another disturbing reality was the presence of lice and other pests. The thick layers of fabric and infrequent washing created a perfect environment for insects. Even queens were not immune to this problem. Historical records mention that both nobles and servants frequently combed their hair and clothing to remove lice. Elizabeth's linen undergarments were likely boiled to kill pests, but her outer garments, filled with embroidery and metallic thread, couldn't be treated. Instead, her chambers were fumigated with burning herbs like sage and rosemary, which were believed to cleanse the air and drive away vermin. It's also worth noting how much labor went into maintaining her clothing, even without washing. Each morning, her ladies-in-waiting would spend hours helping her dress. Gowns had to be carefully arranged and tied, with every fold and jewel positioned perfectly. After wearing them, the garments were brushed, beaten, and stored in cedar chests to protect them from moths. Some were reused and altered to match the latest styles, but washing them in water was out of the question. The queen's laundry servants were responsible mainly for linens and small accessories, never for the gowns themselves. In this sense, her wardrobe was more of a performance costume than everyday attire, designed to impress, not to be practical. This strange relationship with cleanliness reveals a deeper truth about Elizabeth's world. In the 16th century, outward appearance mattered far more than hygiene. Cleanliness was not about health or scent, but about order and social status. A queen's spotless linen and glittering jewels signaled her purity and control, even if her body and clothes were far from clean. For Elizabeth, her image was everything. She was the virgin queen, untouchable, perfect, and eternal. To preserve that illusion, she wrapped herself in layers of fabric and fragrance, concealing the human flaws underneath. From a modern perspective, it's almost unimaginable that a woman who shaped an empire lived surrounded by such discomfort and filth. Yet in her time, this was completely normal. The queen's court smelled of sweat and perfume, her dresses were heavy with dirt, and her skin rarely touched soap. Still, she ruled with unmatched grace and intelligence, her presence so commanding that no one dared notice the odor beneath the splendor. Queen Elizabeth I's unwashed gowns remind us of the paradox of her reign, the combination of brilliance and ignorance, beauty and decay. She stood at the dawn of the modern world, yet lived with the customs of the medieval past. Her fashion inspired nations, her leadership reshaped history, but her hygiene remained trapped in superstition. Beneath the silk and jewels was a human being, powerful, proud, and profoundly imperfect. And perhaps that's what makes her story so endlessly fascinating, a queen who bathed in glory, not in water. The royal palaces of Queen Elizabeth I may look majestic in paintings and descriptions, but the reality inside their grand stone walls was far less elegant. Behind the velvet curtains, golden halls, and perfumed courtiers lay a world that reeked, quite literally. In the 16th century, even the most powerful monarch in the world lived surrounded by filth, foul odors, and human waste. Plumbing, as we know it today, didn't exist. Toilets were crude, hygiene was primitive, and the air inside the palaces was thick with the stench of neglect. Queen Elizabeth I's magnificent courts at Whitehall, Hampton Court, and Windsor Castle were not only centers of power but also some of the smelliest places in all of England. To understand the problem, one has to remember that Tudor architecture was not built with sanitation in mind. There were no flushing toilets, no sewage systems, and no running water. Instead, people used chamber pots, small buckets or bowls kept under beds and chairs, to relieve themselves. Even the Queen had her own version, known as a closed stool, which was essentially a fancy chair with a hole in the middle and a bowl beneath it. The stool was padded, sometimes lined with velvet, and attended to by her personal servants, who were responsible for emptying and cleaning it. It was a highly trusted position, as only the most loyal attendants were allowed such intimate access to the monarch. But outside the Queen's private rooms, the story was far less dignified. The hundreds of courtiers, guards, and servants who lived and worked in the palace also needed to relieve themselves, and there simply weren't enough facilities. Waste was often dumped into buckets, which were later emptied into ditches, courtyards, or directly into the River Thames. The smell was overwhelming, especially in the summer months when heat made everything worse. Even though the Queen's rooms were perfumed with herbs, the stench from the lower halls and courtyards often drifted upward, forcing servants to burn incense and scatter flowers to disguise the odor. The walls and corners of the palace were also victims of poor hygiene. Visitors and workers sometimes relieved themselves in hidden corridors or stairwells, a habit that disgusted foreign dignitaries who visited England. One ambassador once wrote that even the royal palace had a foul stench, as if the floors themselves were alive with filth. The problem wasn't just unpleasant. It was dangerous. Disease spread easily in such conditions. The Tudors had little understanding of germs or sanitation, but they noticed that foul smells often accompanied illness. They believed in the miasma theory, the idea that bad air caused disease, so they constantly tried to mask odors rather than eliminate their sources. To fight the smell, the Queen's servants burned herbs like rosemary, juniper, and lavender in braziers throughout the palace. Rushes, bundles of straw and reeds, were laid across the floors and sprinkled with flowers or herbs to freshen the air. However, this only made things worse over time. As people walked over them, food scraps, dirt, and waste mixed into the rushes, creating a damp, decaying layer that released even more odor. When these rushes were finally replaced, the floors beneath were often crawling with insects and rot. Even the grand feasts for which Elizabeth's court was famous contributed to the filth. After banquets filled with roasted meats, pies, and sweet dishes, the remains were often thrown onto the floor or into the castle moat. Rats, flies, and stray animals thrived in these conditions, adding to the chaos. Servants tried to clean up, but without proper waste disposal, much of the refuse simply accumulated nearby. Some parts of London near the Thames became known for their unbearable smell, largely because of the waste emptied from the royal households. It's almost impossible to imagine the Queen, so poised, so regal, ruling amid such conditions. Yet she did, maintaining her composure and elegance in an environment that would horrify us today. Her palaces were symbols of wealth and civilization, but behind the glittering facade, they were plagued with the same dirt, disease, and odor as the streets of London. Still, Elizabeth managed to transform her court into a place of art, diplomacy, and innovation. Her poise in the face of discomfort only adds to her legend. The truth about Elizabeth's palaces reminds us that history's greatest figures lived in worlds far rougher and filthier than we tend to imagine. The woman who built England's golden age did so while surrounded by the stench of human waste, a reminder that power and glamour have always existed alongside the unpleasant realities of life. For all her refinement and majesty, even the great Queen Elizabeth I could not escape the simple truth of her time, that beneath the gold and glory, the palace still stank. Queen Elizabeth's eyes, striking white face, framed by fiery red hair and jeweled gowns, became one of the most iconic looks in history. But behind that flawless appearance lay one of her darkest secrets. Her beauty routine was dangerously toxic. The Queen's pale, almost ghostly complexion was achieved through the use of a deadly cosmetic known as Venetian ceruse, a white paint made from a mixture of lead and vinegar. It gave her skin the smooth, porcelain glow that symbolized purity and nobility in the 16th century. But it also slowly poisoned her body, damaging her skin, rotting her flesh, and likely contributing to her declining health in later years. In the Elizabethan era, pale skin was more than a beauty choice, it was a status symbol. A fair complexion showed that a person was wealthy enough to stay indoors, away from the harsh sunlight that darkened the skin of laborers. For Elizabeth, whose image as the Virgin Queen depended on appearing pure and almost divine, her white face became a political statement. Venetian ceruse, imported from Italy and made from finely ground white lead mixed with vinegar or water, provided the perfect effect. It covered blemishes, scars, and signs of aging. After surviving smallpox in 1562, Elizabeth was left with scars on her face, and the makeup helped conceal them. But every time she applied it, she was coating her skin with poison. Lead is a heavy metal that the human body cannot process safely. Over time, it accumulates in the organs, causing serious damage. When Elizabeth's skin began to break out in sores, a common reaction to lead exposure, her solution was to apply even more makeup to cover the imperfections, trapping the poison against her skin. This vicious cycle only made things worse. Her once smooth complexion grew rough and discolored beneath the layers of paint. Historians believe that this habit may have led to her skin turning grayish, her hair thinning, and her teeth further decaying, though she never abandoned the ritual. To remove the makeup, Elizabeth used another toxic substance, a mixture of rosewater and mercury. Mercury was believed to cleanse the skin and restore its freshness, but it was even deadlier than lead. The combination of these two substances, one to beautify and the other to cleanse, created a cruel loop of poisoning that slowly weakened her health. By the final years of her life, it said that her face was so damaged that she refused to let anyone see her without her paint. She even had her attendants keep the lights dimmed so no one could see the ravages of her skin beneath the layers of makeup. Her hair suffered too. The reddish-gold locks that had once been her pride began to fall out, likely due to lead exposure and stress. To maintain her regal image, Elizabeth turned to wigs made from the hair of others, often styled into the elaborate shapes seen in her portraits. Each wig was heavily powdered and perfumed, completing the illusion of perfection that had become central to her reign. Elizabeth's toxic beauty practices reveal the extremes to which people in her time went in the name of fashion and power. She wasn't alone. Noblewomen across Europe followed similar routines, smearing lead-based powders and rouge onto their faces. The difference was that, for Elizabeth, beauty was inseparable from authority. Every appearance was a performance, and her face was her crown. She ruled through image as much as through intellect, and so she endured the pain and damage that came with it. In the end, her makeup became both her armor and her curse. The white mask that made her seem immortal also hid her mortality. Beneath the painted surface was a woman suffering from the very tools that created her legend. Her story reminds us how the pursuit of perfection, especially when tied to power and image, can exact a devastating price. Queen Elizabeth I may have conquered nations and inspired a golden age, but even she could not conquer the poison that made her beautiful.